My name is Mark Cole. I served 12 years in the Marines, 2 tours in Afghanistan. I've been trained to observe. I've been trained to survive. I know what a bear looks like. I know what a man looks like. What I saw, what we saw, it wasn't either of them. I'm recording this because, well, the official story is a lie. The sheriff's report said I was disoriented, suffering from altitude sickness and PTSD. They said the cabin was damaged by a bear. That's the narrative. It's clean. It's simple, and it explains why I've been on leave. But my dog, Duke, he was there. He's a Dutch Shepherd, trained for K9 patrol. He doesn't get disoriented, and he knows the difference between a bear and that. We were hiking the high Sierras, just me and him trying to get away from the noise. We found an old cabin miles off any map, tucked away in a ravine. It was supposed to be empty. It wasn't. Duke found it first. He found a Bigfoot inside the cabin. And I know how that sounds. Man finds monster. That's not the story. That's not the part that breaks my mind every night. The story isn't that we found it. The story is what it did next. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't just an animal. It knew things. It did something impossible. This isn't a story about a monster. This is a story about what I saw, what Duke saw, and it will shock you, because it means we are not, and we have never been, alone in these woods. After I left the Corps, I couldn't settle. The suburbs, the 9 to 5, it all felt too loud, too small. I needed silence. I needed space. My therapist called it decompression. I just called it walking. I'd saved up my deployment pay. I bought an old truck, loaded it with enough gear for 6 months, and I took Duke. Duke, he's more partner than pet. He was with me in the K9 unit. He's seen as much as I have. He's steady. He's the only one I trust. We headed for the Sierra Nevada mountains, looking for the parts of the map that were still blank. We'd been hiking for 3 weeks, completely off-grid. No phones, no trails. Just me, my dog, and the sound of the wind in the pines. It was peaceful. For the first time in years, the noise in my head was finally getting quiet. That's when the storm hit. It wasn't on any forecast. It came out of nowhere. A brutal, early-season blizzard that turned the sky black in 20 minutes. The temperature dropped 30 degrees. We weren't prepared for it. We were above the tree line, exposed. The wind was violent. It was like a physical assault. I knew we wouldn't last the night in a tent. We were going to freeze. We had to find cover, fast. We descended, pushing through waist-deep snow, Duke staying right at my heel, his fur already caked in ice. We were in trouble, real trouble. And then, Duke stopped. He stood perfectly still, his head up, sniffing the wind. He wasn't just smelling the storm, he was smelling something else. He barked, not a warning bark, a discovery bark, and then he was off, vanishing into the whiteout. "Duke, heel!" I yelled, panicked. But he was gone. I plunged after him, following his tracks, fearing the worst, a cliff, a bear, anything. I found him 20 yards later at the edge of a deep ravine I hadn't even seen, and tucked into the rocks at the bottom, almost invisible against the stone, was a cabin, an old forgotten hunter's cabin. It was salvation, or so I thought. Okay, Jem, the introduction is complete. Mark and Duke have found the cabin, driven by the blizzard. Now in Chapter 1, they will enter the cabin, find it's not empty, and Duke will make the terrifying discovery promised in the title. The focus is on building suspense in the confined space. Chapter 1, The Silent Intruder. Scene. Mark Cole continues speaking to the webcam, his gaze tightening as he recalls entering the cabin. The cabin wasn't much, just rough-hewn logs, a single window mostly buried in snow, and a collapsed stone chimney. But it was shelter. It was life. The blizzard was roaring outside, shaking the very foundations, but inside, it was eerily quiet. A haven. The door was unlocked, hanging slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, my hand already on my hunting knife. Years of training. Never assume a clear room, especially in the wild. But there was nothing. No movement. No sound but the distant howl of the wind. The air inside was stale, cold but surprisingly dry. It smelled of old wood, damp earth, and something else. Something musky, like wet dog, or perhaps damp fur, but stronger, deeper. I scanned the single room. A rough-hewn table, 2 broken chairs, and a small, rusted wood stove. Cobwebs everywhere. Dust motes danced in the sliver of weak light filtering through the snow-packed window. It looked abandoned. Long abandoned. Clear, I murmured, more to Duke than myself. Duke, however, wasn't so sure. He walked in slowly, nose to the ground, his tail low but not tucked. He was in search mode. His posture was tense, every muscle coiled. He sniffed the floor, moving deliberately towards the back of the cabin, towards a dark corner near the stove. His hackles went up, not a full growl yet, but a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. He was staring at something in the shadows. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, my hand now firmly on the hilt of my knife. My marine training kicked in. Adrenaline surged, my senses sharpened. The musky smell was stronger here, much stronger. I raised my flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. It swept across the corner. Nothing, just a pile of old dark blankets heaped against the wall, half covered in dust. "It's just some blankets, Duke," I murmured, trying to reassure him, and myself. Duke didn't move. He didn't stop that low rumble. His gaze was fixed, unwavering. I took a step closer, my light still on the blankets. "Come on, boy. Let's get this fire going." As I took another step, Duke's rumble changed. It escalated. A sudden, sharp, explosive bark. A warning. And the pile of blankets moved. Slowly, deliberately. It wasn't blankets, it was fur. Thick, dark, matted fur. It shifted. A massive, heavily muscled form began to uncurl. It was huge. Far too large for a human. Far too large for any bear I'd ever seen. The air in the cabin grew heavy. The silence inside became deafening, contrasting with the storm still raging outside. My heart hammered against my ribs. My breath hitched. Every instinct screamed, "Threat!" 2 eyes opened. They weren't the beady, aggressive eyes of a bear. They weren't the feral, unthinking eyes of a wild animal. They were deep-set, intelligent, and they were staring directly at Duke. Then they shifted. To me. I froze. The flashlight beam trembled in my hand. It was him. The legends. The stories. Bigfoot. Sasquatch. Whatever you called it. It was real. And it was in the cabin. It was sitting, hunched, maybe 8 feet tall even in its curled position, its head almost touching the low ceiling. Its fur was dark brown, almost black, matted with what looked like mud and pine needles. Its face was surprisingly human-like, in a raw, primitive way. A heavy brow, a broad nose, thick lips, and those eyes. They held a depth I couldn't comprehend. Duke, my fearless K9 partner, the dog who'd faced down armed insurgents, was now trembling. Not barking, just trembling. A low, desperate whine escaped his throat. The creature didn't move. It didn't growl. It just sat there, watching us, silent, unmoving, like a statue carved from the very forest itself. My hand tightened on my knife, but I knew in my gut. This wasn't a fight I wanted. This wasn't a fight I could win. It was too big, too powerful, too other. We were trapped, miles from civilization in a blizzard in a forgotten cabin, and we were not alone. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The blizzard outside intensified, but inside that cabin, it was utterly still. A heavy, suffocating silence broken only by the frantic beat of my own heart, and Duke's shallow, rapid breathing. The creature didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It just watched us. Its eyes, those intelligent, ancient eyes, they never left us. I couldn't read them. There was no aggression, no immediate threat, but there was no warmth either. Just observation, pure, unblinking observation. I slowly, cautiously, took a step back, pulling Duke gently behind my legs. My hand was still on my knife, but it felt like a child's toy. Useless. My mind raced through every combat scenario, every survival training. Nothing in my 20 years of service had prepared me for this. This wasn't a tactical situation. This was an unknown, a cosmic joke. Duke whimpered, a low, soft sound I rarely heard from him. He was terrified, and that terrified me even more. If Duke, a combat-trained animal, was this shaken, then this thing, this creature, was beyond anything we understood. I tried to speak. My throat was dry. Nothing came out. I just cleared it slowly. The creature's head tilted slightly. A subtle movement. The only movement it had made since it uncurled. It was listening. "Hey," I finally managed, my voice a raspy whisper. "Hey there." It didn't respond. Just watched. I tried another tactic. The military always taught us to establish dominance, to control the space. But how do you establish dominance over a myth? I slowly, deliberately reached for my backpack, which was still slung over my shoulder. It held my water bottle. Hydration was key. A sign of control. The creature's eyes narrowed. Just a fraction. But I saw it. A flicker of something. A warning? I froze, my hand hovering over the zipper. It was testing me, seeing if I would escalate. I slowly, very slowly, pulled my hand back. The message was clear. It controlled this space. Not me. Not Duke. The musky scent in the cabin seemed to deepen. It wasn't unpleasant exactly, just wild, primal. It was the smell of the ancient world. I could feel the cold seeping in from the walls, but a bead of sweat ran down my temple. I was hyper-aware of every sound the storm made outside, every creak of the old cabin, every breath Duke took, every beat of my heart. The Bigfoot shifted, just a little. A massive shoulder twitched. I tensed, ready for it to strike, ready for the end, but it just settled back, deeper into the pile of blankets, its eyes still on us. It wasn't going to attack. Not yet. It was waiting. But waiting for what? For us to leave? The blizzard was a death sentence. For us to make a mistake, for us to make a move. I looked at the stove, the old rusted wood stove. It was the only source of warmth, of life in that cabin. It was cold. We would freeze without a fire. But the stove was in that corner. His corner. My eyes met the creature's. I pointed to the stove. Then I mimed lighting a fire. A desperate plea. An olive branch. It watched my movements. Those ancient eyes seemed to take in every nuance. And then, a flicker. Something almost like understanding. Or perhaps amusement. It didn't move, it didn't gesture. But it also didn't give me a hard no. It was a challenge. A negotiation. It was letting me know that if I wanted fire, I had to earn it. I had to enter its territory. I looked at Duke. He whined again, lower this time. He was looking at the creature, then at me. His message was clear. Don't do it, boss. Don't go near it. But we couldn't stay like this. We would freeze. The cold was already starting to numb my fingers. We had hours, maybe, before hypothermia set in. I took a deep breath. I nodded at the creature. A silent agreement. A mutual understanding. I slowly, cautiously, walked towards the stove. Every muscle in my body was screaming at me to run, to fight, to do anything but turn my back on that thing. But I had to. I had to trust that it understood the universal language of survival. My hands trembled as I opened the stove door. It was empty. Of course, no firewood. I looked at the creature. It still hadn't moved. Its eyes were fixed on me. I needed wood. Outside. In the blizzard. Or, I looked around the cabin. There was no spare wood, only the broken chairs, and the small, crude table. My eyes met the creature's again. It knew. It knew exactly what I was thinking. My desperation, my predicament. And then, it did something. Something subtle. Something that shattered my perception of it as a mere animal. It gestured. Its massive, fur-covered hand with fingers almost as thick as my wrist slowly lifted. And it pointed. Not at the broken chairs. Not at the table. It pointed at a small, almost invisible crack in the log wall near the back of the cabin. A crack I hadn't even noticed. It was showing me a secret. A way out of my immediate problem. A way to build a fire. And I understood, in that moment, that this wasn't just a physical standoff. This was a test of something else entirely. A test of my trust. A test of my intelligence. The creature wasn't just observing, it was communicating. I hesitated. Every fiber of my marine training screamed, trap. Why would a wild animal, trapped in a blizzard, share resources? Why would it help? But those eyes, they weren't malicious, they were simply expectant, waiting for my move. I looked at the crack in the wall. It was barely visible, a thin line where two logs met imperfectly, concealed by moss and shadow. I slowly walked over, my eyes still fixed on the Bigfoot. It remained motionless, watching every step. Duke, whimpering softly, stayed glued to my heels. I reached the crack. It was wider than I thought, leading into a small, dark cavity behind the wall. I put my hand in. It was packed with dry kindling, small branches, and larger pieces of cut wood. Enough for a fire. Enough for the night. It wasn't a natural hiding spot. Someone had put that wood there. Or something. I carefully pulled out an armful of wood. It was perfectly dry. A miraculous find. I walked back to the stove, still moving slowly, deliberately. The Bigfoot's gaze followed my every movement. I knelt by the stove. My hands were still shaking, but now it was from a mix of cold and adrenaline. I laid the kindling, added some paper from my pack, and struck a match. The flame caught quickly, licking at the dry wood. The fire roared to life, casting flickering shadows across the cabin. The warmth was immediate, glorious. Duke, despite his fear, instinctively gravitated towards it, curling up close to my legs. The Bigfoot, however, remained in its dark corner. The firelight barely touched it, leaving it mostly in shadow. It watched the flames. Its eyes seemed to soften just a fraction. A faint, almost imperceptible shift in its posture suggested contentment. We had heat, we had light, we had a fragile, unspoken truce. I leaned back against the wall, pulling my knife out of its sheath and placing it on the floor beside me, a symbolic gesture. Not a weapon of aggression, but a tool of survival. A sign that I wasn't challenging it, but simply existing. The Bigfoot watched the knife. Then it looked at me, and for the first time, I felt a strange sense of something beyond fear. A connection, a mutual understanding of our predicament. Two beings, trapped by a force of nature, sharing a space. Hours passed in that cabin. The blizzard howled, rattling the single window. The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney. And we sat, me, Duke, and the Bigfoot, in silence. I occasionally tossed another piece of wood into the stove. Each time the creature's eyes would follow my hand, then the wood, then the flames. There was no aggression, no challenge, just acceptance. At one point, Duke, emboldened by the warmth of the fire, stirred. He looked at me, then at the Bigfoot, a low, questioning whine in his throat. He was still wary, but his primal fear had subsided into cautious curiosity. "It's all right, boy," I whispered, stroking his head. "Just quiet." The Bigfoot heard me. Its head tilted again as if processing the sound of my voice. I noticed details I hadn't seen before. Its fur wasn't just dark brown. It had streaks of lighter, almost reddish brown, especially around its massive shoulders and chest. Its hands. They were enormous, with long, powerful fingers, but surprisingly dexterous looking. The nails were thick, blunt, not claws but tools. The cabin was small, too small for three of us, especially one of him. The air was getting heavy with the musky scent again. It wasn't just the smell of an animal. It was the smell of the forest itself, condensed, concentrated. I tried to rationalize it. A reclusive ape. A giant, unknown primate. But the eyes, the way it had pointed to the wood, the way it seemed to understand my actions, it defied scientific explanation. It defied my military training. It defied everything I thought I knew about the wild. This wasn't a simple animal. As the night wore on, the storm finally began to abate. The wind lessened its howl. The snow eased to a gentle fall. The cabin became quieter, the crackle of the fire more prominent. I kept watch, never fully sleeping, just dozing in fits and starts, my hand instinctively near my knife. Duke, curled tight, was more relaxed but still occasionally shifted, a low growl barely audible in his sleep. Before dawn, the Bigfoot stirred. It slowly, deliberately, began to uncurl. Its sheer size was immense, filling the small cabin. It stood up, slowly, its massive frame almost scraping the ceiling. It stretched, a silent, powerful movement that rippled through its dense musculation. It turned, and for the first time, it walked towards the door I had barely closed when we came in. My heart pounded. Was this it? Was it leaving? Or was it making its move? It stopped at the door. It didn't open it. It just stood there, facing it, its back to us. And then, it did something that froze the blood in my veins. Something that wasn't aggressive. Something that wasn't hostile. It reached out. Its massive hand. Its long, powerful fingers. They traced something on the inside of the wooden door. It wasn't a scratch. It wasn't a mark. It was a symbol. It etched a complex swirling pattern into the soft wood with its blunt nail, not carving deep but pressing just enough to leave a clear, deliberate impression. It was writing, or drawing, something beyond instinct, something intelligent. It finished the symbol. It looked at it for a long moment. Then, very slowly, it opened the cabin door. The blizzard had stopped. The morning sky was a pale, icy gray. The world outside was a pristine blanket of white. It stepped out into the snow. It didn't look back, it didn't make a sound, it just vanished into the silent, snow-covered forest, leaving me and Duke alone in the cabin. Alone, with the symbol it had left behind. The moment it was gone, the cabin felt empty. Too empty. The warmth from the fire suddenly seemed insufficient against the chilling silence that replaced the creature's presence. Duke, sensing its departure, slowly uncurled, stretched, and then nudged my hand, looking up at me with worried eyes. "It's gone, boy," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "It's gone." But it hadn't left without a trace. The symbol. I walked over to the door, my heart still pounding, but now with a different kind of urgency. Curiosity. The symbol was precisely as I remembered, etched with deliberate care into the raw wood, not deep, but clear. It wasn't a crude scratch. It was intricate. A series of interlocking spirals and straight lines, forming a pattern that was both alien and strangely familiar. It reminded me, vaguely, of some ancient Celtic knots, or perhaps certain indigenous pictograms I'd seen in textbooks. But this was different, more fluid, more organic. It wasn't random. It was designed. I pulled out my phone. Dead, of course, no signal. But the camera still worked. I took multiple photos of the symbol, from every angle. I needed a record. I needed proof, even if it was just for myself. I spent the next hour examining it, running my fingers over the grooves. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It felt like a message. But a message from what? And why? My military training. All my experience in reading terrain, enemy movements, behavioral patterns. It was useless here. This was entirely outside my frame of reference. This was beyond tactics. This was philosophy, anthropology, a new branch of science that didn't even exist. I tried to replicate it on a piece of paper, but my crude drawing couldn't capture the subtle complexity, the almost three-dimensional feel of the etched lines. It was clearly the work of a highly intelligent hand, with a keen understanding of geometry and spatial relationships. This wasn't an animal. This was an entity, a being, one that could communicate, that could understand, that could write. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If this creature could write, what else could it do? If it could communicate, what did it know? What kind of existence had it led, hidden from humanity for so long, possessing an intelligence that we were only now glimpsing? And why leave it for me? What was the purpose? A sign of its own intelligence? A warning? An invitation? The blizzard had completely cleared by midday. The sun broke through the clouds, casting dazzling white light across the snow-covered ravine. It was beautiful and utterly silent. I knew I couldn't stay in that cabin, not anymore. The immediate threat was gone, but a new kind of terror had taken its place. The terror of the unknown. The terror of a world that was suddenly profoundly bigger and stranger than I had ever imagined. I gathered my gear. I started a fresh fire, just enough to melt some snow for water and make coffee. My hands were steady now. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a cold, clinical determination. I had a mission, my new mission. I had to get out of there. I had to get back to civilization, and I had to find out what that symbol meant. Before I left, I took one last look around the cabin. It was still old, still dusty, but it was no longer just an abandoned shelter. It was a sacred space, a meeting ground, a classroom, and I was the student. I closed the cabin door, careful not to damage the symbol. I hoped it would remain, a testament to what had happened, a silent witness. As Duke and I began our long trek back down the mountain, the deep snow slowing our progress to a crawl, my mind replayed every detail. The eyes, the musky smell, the way it had pointed to the wood, the way it had rescued me from the guards. It wasn't just an encounter. It was an initiation, and I realized, with a chill that had nothing to do with the cold, that the Bigfoot hadn't just visited the cabin. It had lived there. It knew that cabin. It knew its secrets, and it knew I would find it. The entire encounter, from the blizzard to the hidden firewood to the final symbol, it felt orchestrated, almost planned, and then the real terror set in. If it had planned all of this, what else did it have planned? What was the real message? And was I ready to receive it? The journey back down the mountain was harder than going up. Not physically, though the snow was brutal. It was harder mentally. My head was filled with the creature, with the symbol, with the impossible. When Duke and I finally staggered out of the wilderness 3 days later, frostbitten and exhausted, we found an old logging road. A park ranger found us a few hours after that. The debriefing was predictable. They sent me to a small rural hospital. The doctors looked at my frostbite, checked for hypothermia, and then, inevitably, put me on a psych hold. Disorientation, exposure, PTSD-induced hallucinations, the standard checklist. I didn't argue. What was the point? I found a super-intelligent writing Bigfoot in a cabin, and it saved my life and left me a symbol. They just upped my medication. I kept silent. I smiled. I nodded. I played the part. I was a veteran suffering from post-combat stress, seeing things in the solitude of the mountains. It was easier for everyone. Duke, thankfully, was cleared. They called his anxiety a reaction to the blizzard. He was glad to see me. He was the only one who knew, the only one who believed. I moved into this small apartment far from the mountains, far from anyone. The noise of the city, the endless traffic, the mundane conversations. It felt like static, like a dull roar that drowned out the one thing I needed to hear. Answers. Every night I'd open my laptop. The photos of the symbol. I zoomed in. I enhanced them. I printed them out and tacked them to the wall. I spent hours just staring at them, trying to decipher, trying to understand. I hit the internet. I started researching ancient languages, indigenous art, archaeological digs, cryptography, anything that even remotely resembled that intricate swirling pattern. I learned about petroglyphs, crop circles, sacred geometry, forgotten civilizations. I became an expert in the obscure. The more I searched, the more frustrated I became. There were similarities, yes, echoes of primal patterns, but nothing was an exact match. The Bigfoot symbol was unique. It felt fundamental, like a piece of a universal language that predated human history. My savings began to dwindle. I wasn't working. I was obsessed. The mundane world faded into the background. My only reality was that symbol, and the creature that left it. I lost contact with my old unit. My family thought I was having another episode. My calls went unanswered. I was alone, truly alone, with this impossible secret. Duke was my only companion. He would lie at my feet watching me work, occasionally nudging my hand with his nose as if to say, "Keep going, boss, you'll find it." I started sketching the symbol, hundreds of times, trying to embed it in my subconscious, hoping for an insight, hoping for a breakthrough. One night I was staring at a particularly complex section of the symbol, a set of 3 interlocking circles that formed a sort of triangular pattern. It reminded me of something I had seen before, something from my military past. It was an old tactical map from Afghanistan. The symbol, it wasn't just a picture, it was a map. The 3 interlocking circles were not just decorative, they were coordinates, triangulation points. My heart began to pound. Not with fear this time, with exhilaration, with a sudden, terrifying surge of understanding. The Bigfoot hadn't just left a symbol, it had left me instructions. I cross-referenced the pattern with ancient star charts, with topographical maps of the Sierra Nevada, with satellite imagery I illegally downloaded from obscure forums. It took me another 3 months. 3 months of sleepless nights, fueled by coffee and a desperate, burning need for answers. And I finally found it. The triangulation points converged on a single location, not a specific mountain peak, not a forest, but a system, a network of caves, deep under the earth, just a few miles from the very cabin where I had encountered the Bigfoot. It wasn't just a random cave system, it was massive, far larger than any known geological formation in that region, and it was hidden, deliberately hidden. Not just from human eyes, but from satellite scans, from ground-penetrating radar. It was shielded, almost invisible. The Bigfoot hadn't just been in the cabin. It had been guarding the cabin. And the cabin, it wasn't just a shelter. It was an entry point, a gate. And the symbol it left for me, it wasn't a message. It was a key to something far older, far more profound than a mere Bigfoot encounter. A key to something hidden deep beneath the mountains, something that had been waiting. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had to go back. I had to go back to that cabin. I had to go back to that mountain. I had to find out what was hidden in those caves, what the Bigfoot was guarding, and why it had chosen me to find it. Okay, Jim. Chapter 5 is complete. Mark has decoded the symbol, realizing it's a map to a hidden cave system, and he knows he must return. Now, in Chapter 6, Mark and Duke prepare for their perilous journey back to the cabin in the mountain, filled with a new, terrifying purpose. This chapter focuses on the preparation, the emotional burden, and the final descent into the unknown. Chapter 6, The Call Back to the Mountain. Scene. Mark Cole continues speaking to the webcam. His gaze is now focused, resolute, a grim determination replacing the earlier weariness. He is clearly preparing for something. The moment I deciphered the symbol, the static in my life cleared. The noise, the confusion, it all faded. I had a mission again, a clear objective. But this wasn't Afghanistan. This wasn't about enemy combatants or extraction points. This was something else entirely. I spent the next 2 months preparing. I sold most of my belongings. The apartment became just a base of operations. I invested every last cent into specialized gear, high-altitude climbing equipment, advanced mapping tools, satellite communication devices that could function in extreme wilderness, medical supplies, rations for weeks, and a new weapon, not a hunting rifle, not a combat knife, something specifically designed for unknowns, a high-power flare gun capable of disorienting a large creature, sonic emitters, bear spray, enhanced. I wasn't going to kill anything, but I was going to be ready to defend. Duke was an essential part of my preparation. We trained, long, grueling hikes in the foothills, conditioning him for the arduous ascent. I practiced climbing, navigation, extreme cold weather survival. My Marine training, dormant for years, came roaring back. This was familiar territory, meticulous planning, rigorous execution. The stakes were just different. The hardest part was the silence. I couldn't tell anyone, not a word. The official story was still PTSD and altitude sickness. If I started talking about hidden cave systems and Bigfoot maps, I'd be institutionalized for sure. So I kept it all inside. Just me and Duke. Duke, my silent confidant, seemed to understand the gravity of our new mission. His eyes, when he looked at me, were serious, focused. He knew we were going back to that place, to him. The night before we left, I packed the truck one last time. The snow had melted in the lower altitudes, but the high Sierras would still be treacherous even in late spring. I loaded the last of my gear, double-checking every strap, every buckle. I sat on the tailgate for a long time, watching the stars, the vast, indifferent universe, and I thought about the Bigfoot, the creature's eyes, the symbol, the way it had saved me, and the chilling possibility that it wanted me to come back. Why? What did it want to show me? What was so important, so profound, that it would risk exposing its existence not just to me, but potentially to the wider world if I failed to keep it secret? A knot of fear tightened in my stomach. This wasn't just a scientific expedition. This felt sacred, dangerous, like I was about to walk into a place where humanity wasn't meant to go. The next morning before dawn, Duke and I set out. The drive was long, the roads getting progressively worse as we climbed into the mountains. I parked the truck miles from any discernible trail, burying it under a tarp far off the beaten path. Then we started hiking. The mountain was different this time. No blizzard. The air was crisp, clean, filled with the scent of pine and wet earth. But the beauty was tainted. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret. Every rustle in the undergrowth made my hand instinctively reach for my sidearm. I followed my old tracks, or what was left of them. The terrain was unforgiving. Steep inclines, treacherous scree slopes, dense thickets of brush. But I had the map now. The symbol. It guided me. As we approached the ravine where the cabin lay, a strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't just dread. It was an anticipation, like coming home to a place that shouldn't exist. We found the cabin. It was exactly as I had left it. The door was still ajar, the symbol still etched into the wood, untouched, unchanged. I stepped inside. The musky scent was still there, faint but present. The cold stove sat in the corner. The silence was profound. I looked at the symbol one last time, comparing it to my meticulously drawn map. My coordinates. I knew exactly where the entrance to the cave system was. It was just a few hundred yards from the cabin, hidden behind a waterfall, obscured by a dense thicket of old-growth pines. Duke nudged my hand, then whimpered softly, looking towards the back of the cabin, towards the forest beyond. He knew. He knew this was the point of no return. "This is it, boy," I whispered, patting his head. "No turning back now." I gathered my pack. I took a deep breath, and I walked out of the cabin, leaving the sanctuary of the known behind. The map led us to a small, hidden gorge, and there, behind a curtain of icy, roaring water, was a dark, jagged opening in the rock face. The entrance to the cave system. It was vast, black, silent, a gaping maw into the unknown. Duke stood by my side, his body tense, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He was ready. I switched on my powerful headlamp. The beam cut through the absolute darkness, revealing nothing but glistening wet rock and an endless void. I took one last look at the sky, at the towering pines. Then, with Duke at my side, I stepped through the waterfall and into the mouth of the cave. We were going in, to find out what the Bigfoot was guarding, and why it had chosen me to be its messenger. The moment we stepped through the waterfall, the world changed. The sound of the waterfall vanished, replaced by an absolute, suffocating silence. The air grew cold, heavy with the smell of damp earth and something ancient, primal. My headlamp cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing a vast cavern, far larger than I'd anticipated. The walls were smooth, almost polished, not natural rock formations, but worked stone, carved. This wasn't just a cave, it was a structure. Duke whimpered softly, pressing against my leg. He sensed it too, the profound, unsettling otherness of this place. We moved slowly, deliberately. Every step echoed in the cavern. My headlamp revealed intricate carvings on the walls, strange symbols I'd never seen before, similar in style to the one on the cabin door, but far more complex, weaving together into vast murals. They told a story I couldn't read. The air grew colder, and then the light, faint, pulsing, ethereal light. It emanated from deeper within the cavern, a soft blue-green glow that pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat. We walked towards it. Duke was wary, but he followed. He trusted me, or perhaps he trusted him. The cavern opened into an even larger chamber, and there in the center was the source of the light. It was a structure, not made of stone, but of a material I didn't recognize, something dark, metallic, yet somehow organic. It pulsed with that soft blue-green glow. It was massive, easily 30 feet tall, shaped like a colossal spiraling crystal, and surrounding it, guarding it, were them. Not one, not two, but a dozen. A dozen Bigfoots. They stood motionless, utterly still, like ancient sentinels carved from the living rock. Their fur was dark, matted. Their eyes, when my headlamp caught them, reflected the eerie blue-green light. They were guardians. And this pulsating crystal, this was what they guarded. I took another step. Duke let out a low growl, and then one of the Bigfoots moved, slowly, deliberately. It turned its massive head, and it looked directly at me. It was him, Subject Alpha, the one from the cabin. I knew it. I felt it. It walked towards me, not aggressively, not threateningly, just directly. Its footsteps were silent on the cavern floor. It stopped a few feet in front of me. Its face was impassive. Those deep, intelligent eyes stared into mine. It raised its massive hand, slowly, and it pointed, not at me, not at Duke. It pointed at the pulsating crystal. Then it did something impossible, something that shattered my entire understanding of reality. It reached out its other hand, and it placed its fingers against its own chest. And then it spoke, not in growls, not in grunts, not in a language I recognized, but in pure, resonant thought. A clear, unmistakable voice, echoing not in my ears, but directly in my mind. We are the keepers, the voice boomed in my skull, of the seed. I staggered back, Duke barking furiously, sensing my shock. The seed, the thought echoed again, of life, of earth. They came long ago. They built. We guard. I looked at the crystal, the symbol, the Bigfoot. The overwhelming weight of ancient knowledge crashed down on me. It wasn't an alien technology. It wasn't a weapon. It was a repository, a library, a backup. The crystal pulsed, and the Bigfoot communicated again. They built us to guard. When man destroys, we restart. The seed restores. I stared at it, my mind reeling. They weren't just guarding a technology. They were guarding the entire future of the planet. A biological ark, an ancient failsafe system, a plan B, and they were us. They were ancient humans, modified, engineered, living tools, designed for a single purpose, to restart life when humanity inevitably destroyed itself. Now, you know, the Bigfoot's thought resonated. Go, tell the others. The seed is ready. My head spun. Tell who? The world. They'd never believe me. They'd kill it. They'd exploit it. I looked at the Bigfoot, at its ancient, sorrowful eyes. It knew the risks. It didn't care. The message had to get out. The truth about humanity's past and its terrifying future had to be known. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light erupted from the crystal. A deafening hum filled the cavern. The keepers around us began to stir, their eyes now glowing with an intense blue-green light. Go! The Bigfoot's thought screamed in my mind. The time is near. He wasn't just guarding the seed. He was activating it. The keepers began to move, not towards me, but towards the cavern walls. Their massive hands pressed against the stone, and the ancient carvings began to glow, mirroring the pulsating light of the seed. The cavern itself was coming alive. I grabbed Duke. I didn't look back. I ran. Back through the carved passages, back towards the faint light of the waterfall. The light and the hum intensified behind me. The keepers were awakening. The seed was activating. I burst through the waterfall, gasping for breath, Duke panting beside me. The mountain air, clean and sharp, felt like a shock to my lungs. I scrambled up the ravine, looking back down at the waterfall. The entrance was now completely obscured by a shimmering blue-green light that pulsed behind the water. The cave was sealed, hidden, protected, and the final message from the Bigfoot in my mind. The seed is an awakening. Will man be ready? I've been on the run ever since. This laptop, these files, everything I saw, the photos, the maps, the recorded thoughts translated as best I could. It's all here. I had to get the truth out. I had to tell you what I found in those caves. What the Bigfoot and what the keepers are really guarding. They're not monsters. They're not a missing link. They're our past and our future. A failsafe. A reset switch for the entire planet. And the symbol? It wasn't a map to the seed. It was a warning from it. A sign that it was almost ready. That the time was near. The question isn't whether Bigfoot is real. The question is, are we ready for the end of the world? Are we ready for the restart? They're coming. They've been trying to silence me for weeks. But the truth is out now. You have it all. You have to believe me. They're coming for me. But the seed is already awake.